So welcome to the last session of the Monday night version of Ancient Greek and the First Philosophers. So the plan is, I think this is the Platonic Academy of Melbourne routine, that the last week, a slightly more informal half-hour question and answers or discussion. And I'd be, I think we'd both be particularly interested to know of any future interest in and what kind of shape any future course involving ancient Greek might take. And I've got some suggestion about if you want to follow up by yourself, there's now an enormous number of resources, and I have some suggestions about how you can do that as well. But so my plan for the first hour then is we'll just look at some sentences and I'll offer a suggestion or two about their interpretation and about the place of pre-Socratic philosophy as a whole. But does anyone have any questions or concerns at the beginning that I can discuss? Anything remaining from previous class?
I have a question, but it might not be a very serious one. Do you know how the names of the letters came about?
Slowly.
Like alpha, because all of the letters would have had to exist simultaneously in order to put them together to form a name for alpha and beta and so on. So how did the names get chosen? Do you know that or not?
Well, for a long time, like in the classical period, they didn't have those names. And the sound referred to the name. Like
ABC, like the Roman alphabet.
Yes. Yeah. And so when you're reading, like if Plato says, refers to an alpha, in the text, it'll just have an alpha, and you have to think inverted commas, but the sound up. So there's no, so they're post-classical, especially, and the longer names are medieval. Omicron instead of O, and so on.
So it's not from coronaviruses.
I'm sorry?
They didn't take it from a list of coronaviruses around the world.
That's right. Apparently it's the other way around. Yeah.
But it is interesting that using the scientific language, you get beta rays and gamma rays and delta rays, while in modern Greek it's not. It's vita, gamma, and delta. It's interesting how it's the ancient Greek that the scientists take it from.
Well, yeah, and Latin became the language of science for a long time, but the people who invented our science knew Greek and Latin, and so that was for them the language of philosophy and science, and they named things in that way. And to the pain and regret of medical students everywhere who haven't had it at primary school and high school. Yeah. But I sort of vaguely understand when a doctor tells me you've got X and Y wrong. I vaguely understand that he's referring to the ankle being inflamed because it's an itis and so on. Yeah. So I might begin with Heraclitus, and if we read through a few sentences of Heraclitus and a couple of sentences of Parmenides, and then I'll just try and make a few remarks about their understanding as a whole. And if we have a chance, there's that sentence from the Phaedo that I put in the third handout that it will be good to get to, depending on our time. But we'll start with Heraclitus. Yeah, I'm going to start with a long sentence that illustrates the men-de parallel that Heraclitus frequently uses. This is the first half of the sentence, and I want to explain some of the Greek so that we can translate it as a whole, and then I'll write up the second half so we can look at that. So, tor, does anyone recognize that word?
It's not an article, is it? It's not the Omicron because it's Omega.
It is the article, yeah. It is the article in the dative. So the masculine article is ho, like ho logos, the speech. But in the dative, it's tor logor, and that's so the dative usually has the sense of two or four. And the word we're dealing with here is ho theos, the God, right? So, and in this sentence, it's tor men theor. The men goes after the article. It always comes second. And often the article and the noun are broken up. And the way this is, if you come from English, that's confusing. But from the Greek point of view, the endings are telling you what goes with what. And so you're not disturbed by having to slightly hold your breath while another part of a speech indicates how the sentence is structured. But in English, that can be, when we come from with English word order expectations, that can be confusing. And that's not the subject either, it's the dative. So it's that two or for which the action is happening. Is that making sense? Or should I talk more about the article, or is there any question? Because
I think we'll see the dative once we hear the context of the sentence, is it? Okay. But so it's the God, but men, is that not the God kala panda? Is that good always?
So kalos, kale kalon in Greek is beautiful or noble.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's very good though, because you've picked up that like this comes from the word which means all or every, pas, pasa, pan, and that's the neuter plural in the nominative. So, and that's the subject. It's an nominative, so it's a subject, and we have other nominatives that are agreeing with it. So they're all neuter plural nominative, neuter plural nominative, neuter plural nominative. So that's how the center is structured. So we've got the verb is esti. Now this is one complication in Greek. If you said so the person is noble, you have an agreement between number and the verb. So it's a singular noun, singular verb, third person singular. And the adjective agrees in person, case, and number. Now, in Greek, though, neuter plurals take a singular verb. So if you said, you want to say ta dora, the gifts are good, you don't put in the word AC, third person plural, they are. You use that for human beings. For things, it's esti, which is confusing for us who come from a modern language. So the gifts are good. And the reason is that the neuter words used to refer to a collection of things. This collection of things is this. The sheep are white, and so on. But it ends up, now it's used for every neuter word, and that breaks the rule of agreement that we have for feminine and masculine, where if you have a plural verb, they are, you have to have hoi anthropoi, a plural noun. Okay. So panta means all or every. So or, and as in almost every sentence of Greek, you have to think something like things, all things, or all beings, but all, or everything. All things, esti, are, and that's the neuter plural with the singular verb. All things are beautiful. Kai, can someone supply Kai?
And
Thank you. And Agatha,
good.
good. Kai,
And
and now Dikaya, we haven't had this, I don't think.
Just.
Yes, that's right. So the noun dicare, dicare, feminine noun, meaning justice and revenge and a few other things, but justice fundamentally, or a law case and so on. And the adjective that comes from that, which I need to write. Dikaios, dikaya, dikaion is the adjective for just. Just or right. Okay, so all things are noble and good and just, to men theor, for the God. Anything I can elaborate about that?
And the men, didn't we? Oh, that was men, wasn't it? With the
There is no, that's right, that's correct.
That's right, but
Yeah.
it's not in this case. Men means in this case. Sorry.
So we have a men, and it's almost always followed by a de on the one hand and on the other. And I'll write up the de now so we can see what thought he's trying to balance. Okay, so the basic structure of the sentence turns around the men and the dead. For the God, in the singular, such and such. But on the other hand, human beings. So, and it's a deliberate splitting apart of these two ways of being and comparison on the same level in the sentence. This on the one hand and that on the other. Okay, so for the God, everything is noble, just, and good. But human beings, and then we have a new verb. So lambano means I take or I receive, but it can also mean I assume or I understand. You could, quite colloquially, actually, you could just say take. You know, if you take something a certain way, you interpret it a certain way. It has that sense. So for the God, everything good, noble, and just. But human beings take, and then within that men there, we have another men. Another men there. Take tar men, tar de. So this is that idiom we had before, hot men. You know, one person does this, another person does that. And now we have tar, which is the neuter plural definite article. So the, and you have to think, as in many places in ancient Greek, things, right? So, but tar men, tar det means some things and other things. In the same way you think one human being, but the other human being, such and such. Is that intelligible to rush through? Okay. So, but human beings take some things to be unjust. Ta men, some things to be unjust. Ta de, but other things, dikaya, to be just. So what can I explain in that sentence? I'll go through the whole thing, and please interrupt and ask me anything that doesn't make sense. So basic structure. To men thayor, for the God. One thing applies, but human beings do something else. So for the God, all things are noble or beautiful and good and just. But by contrast, human beings take some things to be unjust and some things to be just.
Can I ask why in the top line, kala is before panda? Wouldn't make sense. He's talking about the three things, isn't he? He's talking about good and just, and why is it panda after the kala and not before?
To emphasize the kala. And so why would he want to do that? So so what he's so the basic thought, from the point of view that he takes to be the divine point of view, there is a unity of the being of all things. They're all good, they're all noble, and all just. So the fact that everything operates in a certain way, we would say, according to the laws of physics or something. And he says, according to the exchanges of fire for fire. So there is a final element into which and out of which all things in proportion, in harmony, come to be and pass away. And so from the perspective of the whole, of the cosmos, of the divine, that is all good and just and noble. Now, human beings, we, in an act of fiction, call some things just and other things unjust. So we disturb that natural harmony and create a human artificial harmony, or attempt to, and make laws and practices and customs. And notice that he doesn't say we make the good and noble things, we make the just things. That's the specific act of making that human beings perform when they make laws and their own gods and so forth. They all stem from justice, which stems from the political, the being of the political community. Now, the color, there's another fragment of his in which he says, a hidden harmony is more beautiful than a manifest one. And what he means is something like the underlying principles that order the whole are more beautiful than the principles of beauty of an artifact, even a statue or the Parthenon, or the laws by which people act decently and so on. Those are things that we take to be beautiful or noble. But he is saying that what is genuinely noble is the order of the whole. And that's, I think, possibly why he brings the kala to the front and why the dikaya is last. But yeah, any questions about how that works grammatically or for some reason I can't hear you, Bernie. It doesn't look like you're muted. It looks like you're not muted, but
is that better? Sorry.
That's it, yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested in philosophically, and the hidden things are talking about the hidden things as being more beautiful, more just, and more good. Kind of relates to Plato a bit, but also this notion of it kind of relates to Plato and to Platonism in, say, Augustine's notion that all is good, and the modern expression "it's all good," and at this higher level, it's all good. So you can see how Plato is coming out of this tradition. But the other thing I just wanted to ask you about is often you see in translation this thing where the translator inserts all things or inserts the things thing, which can be complicated when you're talking about forms and sensible things and so on, because it kind of confuses the translation. And I know there are words for when you're specifically referring to sensible things, it's where we get phenomena from, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm just wondering if you could say a bit about that insertion of things and why they didn't need that and why we need it and the problems it causes.
Yeah, that's a very interesting issue, but yeah, and it's why when we're dependent on translation, we are dependent on an interpretation. And my limited experience is that most modern scholarship interpret things in the light of modern science as being a paradigm of nature, and therefore, when they say things, they mean an object of modern natural science, which is confusingly understood to be both an object of sense perception and something that can be captured in mathematical formula, and those two things aren't the same. So it's very confusing. Yeah, maybe I'll be able to say something more useful as we go on to some of the others, but what the point you raise is extremely valid for the books that we're reading. So every Greek sentence begins with a conjunction. And this one's gar, traditionally translated for, but we use that so little in contemporary English. I went to the pub for I wanted a beer, so because is probably a better translation, but when it's at the beginning of a sentence, we don't tend to say because at the beginning of a sentence. So I myself sometimes fall back on for, but anyway, for or because governs the beginning of the sentence. And then within the sentence, we have men and de. And the more Greek you read, the more you'll see men and de in almost every sentence. So for or because, and then the subject is ethos. And we had that little phrase last time that I attempted to interpret. Ethos, anthropo, daimon. Character for a human being is fate, or a god for a human being is their character, and so on. Multiple interpretations are possible for that phrase. So ethos, character. And we've had the noun anthropos, and there's an associated adjective, anthropeos, anthropeia, anthropeion, human, right? So there's the adjective, human. That's the noun character. This is the conjunction for or because. I think I do have the vocabulary on the previous pages of the handouts if you do want to look at it, but yeah, I'll just try and make it clear now. So that's an R of some kind. Okay, for human character, uk eke. So eke it's a very common verb. Echo, I have, or I hold, or I'm able to do something with an infinitive, but the fundamental meaning is to have something. Echo. So human character, uk, and can someone supply what uk means?
Is it not?
That's right, that's right. So uk eke means he, she, it, that's third person singular. He, she, it does not have. So for human character, does not have, and then we have this noun, which I'll need to explain. So gnome means judgment, or another word for intelligence, but yeah. So it's a feminine word like arke, gnoher, gnome, and in the accusative plural, gnomas. And I'm not quite sure what to make of the. You can't really translate the plural. You just maybe I'll just change this to the accusative singular. That might make it easier. Her gnome, human character does not have judgment, does not have discrimination or intelligence. That's the
I'm on. Yeah, I was gonna because the word doxa means judgment as well, doesn't it? Because that turns up in Plato, doxa.
Yeah.
But is that different from this kind of judgment? Is that a different sort of judgment?
Yeah. So doxa in Plato means a judgment in the sense of opinion or a conviction, maybe, as opposed to a true judgment. Yeah. So that's someone's opinion or their conviction, but it's not it's not correct judgment per se. So for human character does not have judgment, de. But on the other hand, so that's human, divine has. So you have to think the divine has judgment, has discrimination, has understanding. Now, these fragments need to be understood in the light of the fact that we're talking about a pantheistic society where there are many, many gods, and everyone is daily carrying out sacrifices and prayers and so forth to these multitudinous deities, and they're central to the life of the city. And so it really is it's as similar to the revolution that Plato carries out in books 2 or 3 of the Republic, where he also gets rid of the Greek gods and replaces them basically with the ideas. And that this is as fundamental a rejection of the Greek self-understanding of the divine as is Plato's. If the divine has judgment and Heraclitus shares in that judgment, then that means there's a divine way of life, Heraclitus's way of life, and he is the one who, as he says in the first fragment, which we looked at a couple of weeks ago, he's the one who can understand and discriminate and point out things by their nature. That's the divine understanding or activity. Whereas most people share only in the human all too human character. Thank you. Sorry, I should have asked, was there anything I could explain further in my before?
So Martin, is this quote is saying that humans don't have judgment, but Heraclitus is saying that he does?
Human character, but yeah, human character, but the mind participates in the divine. And that's why I tried to bring out how the first time we talked about Heraclitus, how he says the following thing, that, you know, the common everyone lives in a particular city, governed by particular beliefs, with particular gods and a particular wall, and so on. Habits, speech, dialect. But he is saying that it's necessary to follow the universal, that which is always and everywhere true. And that is the universal, just two words for universal. But he makes a joke of this word, sunos, in another fragment by relating it closely to sun, which means with, and noos, which means mind. Sun noos, he interprets as sunos. So the mind knows the genuinely universal, and that's the genuinely divine, not these particular beings, which are artificial. There's a phrase that makes use of fire in Aristotle's Ethics in book 5, and he's talking about justice, and he makes the remark that different communities have different laws. The Persians do this to their dead, the Greeks do this, but fire goes upwards in Persia and Greece. And that's the kind of thing Heraclitus means, that the universal things, the things that are the genuine objects of the mind, do not belong to the particular constructions. Yeah.
And they're unseen and they're divine. So again, this relates to what Plato then went on to say, that all knowledge is divine, and that you should the forms are divine, and turn your attention towards them and not to the particulars. Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, so there's definitely that. I think you've touched on exactly where there is continuity, that the highest is the intelligible order, and that's what we now call divine for Plato. And that's exactly right. But there is this break, which I want to get to shortly, on how we understand that. But that in itself, I think, is quite true. I might do one more long sentence from Heraclitus, and then we'll go to Parmenides. So, lege. It's a longer sentence, but I'll start with this. So lege, can anyone construe lege?
Says.
Yeah, so he, she, it says. So in this case, the subject is Heraclitus. So Heraclitus. Heraclitus says, and this little pronoun just means somewhere, who. So he says somewhere. So hoti, have we had that enough for anyone to remember what that? Okay, he says that. Panta, All. So all things. Then we have a verb that we haven't had before. Koreo means to change place, to move. And it's got the third person singular ending. And so that's neuter, plural in the nominative case with a singular verb, because neuter plurals always take a singular verb. So all things or changes place or moves. Everything moves. Kai?
And
I saw 3 pairs of lips say and, so I understood that you understood it, but on mute. But and Uden, I think we've had that once before.
Nothing.
Nothing. Uden is nothing. So menor means I remain in place. It could be I await something, or I stay, remain in place. Nothing stays still. Nothing remains in place.
It's interesting to see the roots of these words, because like menon means I live, you know, in modern Greek, you know.
Right.
Yeah. So it's interesting, yeah.
My favorite is apparent alogo, that is without logos, is an alternative word for horse in addition to epos. That's my favorite, but of the ones I know. So when we get down to there, I'm going to have to rub this out and put the rest of the sentence up. This is on the second handout in the Heraclitus fragments, but I can't fit it all on. So Heraclitus somewhere says that all things move and nothing stays in place. And now we have the main verb after the and. So we've got that verb. And we get down to there with that. Sorry, we get down to, that's the first clause of what he says, and then a conjunction, and he says, and he ape kasdor. So this word is, I'm going to get rid of this so I can. This word acorn means a likeness, a similitude, or an artifact, and that's where we get icon. There's a whole series of words that have a very similar roots, acos, acors, acorn, and they all have this epsilon iota kappa root that has something to do with the production of an image. So this word, apo a kasdor, means I make an image. or I liken. So ape kasde, he likens, and then the thing that you're likening to something else, that's the direct object of that verb, and that goes in the accusative. And the direct object is ta onta. So onta is the neuter, plural, of the participle of the verb to be. So it means beings. And it's got the article there to make emphatic that it is the beings. So he likens, accusative, ta onta, the beings. And then what you liken it to takes the dative. So the dative case, if you have a noun in a dative case, the usual translation is to or for that thing. And a raw air is a flowing, something that flows, for example, a river, right? A flowing. But it's more the activity of flowing than the body of water. Yeah, so I'll just say flowing. Now, potamos, it's a masculine noun like logos, potamos, and potamos is river. One way of illustrating that is a hippos is a horse, potamos, river, hippopotamus is a river horse, right? So potamu, what can someone tell me the case of that, or is that too?
Genitive.
That's very good. That's the genitive, which usually means of or the possession. And in this case, it's the genitive of possession in relation to the flowing. So Heraclitus likens the beings to the flowing of a river. And then and we'll go to the last clause, and I'll rub this out and put that up. So this as a whole, is there any questions that I can answer?
Martin, I'm just interested in the word he's using there for motion. How do you pronounce that again?
Koreye.
Koreye.
Yeah, which
Koreye.
is later contracted to just kore in classic Greek.
So Plato also uses kinesis, where we get kinesis from.
Yeah, that's got a different root.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like kinetic and all those.
Yeah.
And that means to set in motion or to change something. Yeah, and so kinesis, motion or change.
Yeah, so it includes both change in space, in place, and then also change in the same place. So
right.
Some people do think of it as motion, but I sometimes say it could be change. But does Heraclitus use that word, those roots, that word kinesis, or does he usually use this other one?
I can't recollect now. I'd have to check.
Yeah. Okay.
I think. Yeah, I have a vague recollection that in some of the quotes he might, but they're quotes, so we don't know if it's his. Some of them are just references to what he says. Like this. This is from the Cratylus, so we don't know. Yeah, we're hoping.
Oh, this is from the Cratylus, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay.
Plato points out you can move by turning around and stay in the same place. That's one point Plato made. You're talking about there's 7 different kinds of motion or something. That was one of them.
Right. No, correct. You can have movement in place, and you have change without movement, and Sorry, I think you're on mute, Valerie.
Martin, then could this word kore also relate to dance?
Yes. It's actually the dance is a koros, but you're which is also the word for the place where the dance occurs. And you are moving in place. Yeah, they've definitely got the same root.
Martin, I was just going to say also that the word roi about motion relates to the more because it's a flow, because it's a different type of movement, I think. Would that be right?
It's a different, sorry, I missed the first part of what you said. It's a different kind of movement to this one.
Kinesis,
Oh, right.
or the other sort of ones, because it relates to flow, like water flow.
Yeah, I think he wants to assimilate everything to the gradual, not erosion, but the gradual alteration rather than a manifest change of place or, yeah. So Heraclitus somewhere says that everything changes place and nothing remains in place, and he likens the beings to the flow of a river. And I'll rub that out unless there's any question, and then we'll go to the last clause. So, kai lege hoti. Can someone offer a translation? Kai lege hoti.
And said that.
And he says that. Now, here we have an adverb dis, which means twice. So the adverb will qualify the verb. We have a long way to go to get to the verb, which is typical of Greek, not of English, right? You know, he ran quickly, she spoke well, and so on. The adverb is usually with the verb. Okay, so we have ace, which is a preposition, which takes the accusative. So a preposition introduces a noun or a noun phrase into the sentence. And the noun that's introducing is potamon, which is in the accusative, as it should be, following the preposition ace. And ace means into. It has the spatial meaning of into, and in metaphorical senses, it means in regard to and other things like that. But for this purpose, it's into. So into river, and ton is the definite article that agrees with potamon. They're both masculine, accusative, singular. And we just have to understand auton. So autos, alter, autor is the most common pronoun in ancient Greek. It has a number of uses, which are, some of them are complicated, and we don't have to discuss them very much. What we have to do is just discuss one use that is reasonably common, and that's if you put the article before the pronoun and between the article and the noun, it means same. Autos, anthropos, the same human being. So here, into the same river. And that's all accusative masculine. Can I explain anything further of what I've been through thus far? Kainor means walk or go. Now, what we haven't done a lot of tenses of the verb deliberately because there's enough complexity in what we're doing. But I'll just show you an easy example. So luo means I release. And you can make the future by just adding a sigma before the personal ending and after the stem. So I will release. So once you know the present tense endings, you also know the future. You just have to put the sigma in after the stem before the ending. Now, Bersor is the future for binor. It's irregular, so it changes stem. So Bersor, I will go or I will step. Bersay, yeah, he, she, it will step. Okay. So, and he says that yeah, maybe I'll change that to second person singular. Yep, lues, you release, leges, you speak, you are speaking, verses, you will step. Modified by the adverb meaning not, so you will not step. Further modified by the adverb meaning twice, you will not step twice into the same river. Any questions about how that works together? Okay.
So that's one of Heraclitus's most famous sayings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had to modify it a little bit, but that's the guts of it. It's, yeah. Yeah, I'm leaving myself no time to discuss interpretational issues. So I'm just going to do one very brief phrase from Parmenides and then speak for a few minutes, offer some suggestions, which we can discuss, and then we can have a more free-flowing discussion. So this is the famous third fragment in the Deals Grants edition. So the conjunction introduces the sentence for or because. We don't know what came before, possibly fragment 2. We don't know. But so we can ignore that for our purpose. We're just trying to understand the sentence. So the subject of it is top alto. Well, actually, that's controversial. I'm just going to make this suggestion to get us going. So top alto. Any guesses as to what that might mean?
The same?
The same, the same. So for the same, and then we have the main verb of the sentence, esten. For the same is, and the conjunctions are te, kai. For the same is te, kai, means both this and that. So for the same is both noein and aenein. The same is both to intellect and to be. Now, no one knows what this means. I actually just reread an essay, 35-page essay by Heidegger on what this means, which is very interesting. And I don't think he understands what it means. So I'm going to offer you a very simple and probably untrue interpretation, and you can offer your own. But to do that, and this will just be my summary. I'll just try and spend a few minutes quickly. And I'm just going to do this through a few words. Philosophy begins with the discovery of nature. And the word physis, like the word natura in Latin, they have their roots in that which is born and grows of its own accord. The natural is that which comes to fruition without human making without human making. And it seems that which occurs without human making has to be the principle of the human beings and every other being. We're the unusual being in that we make artifacts as part of our nature, but what we are thereby doing is covering over the truth, the natural principles of things. So nature leads us to the principles. And Heraclitus, Parmenides, Thales all talk about principles, and they use, as I would suggest, metaphors, things like fire and water. And they all say, it's quite funny in the history of the scholarship, often Heraclitus says there are many things, and Parmenides says there's only one being, and they both say both. Because what they're both saying is that the phenomena, the things we apparently experience, are individual and many, but there is one true understanding of things. And that true unified understanding is the dominating principle of all things. And that means that there's an ordered whole. Some of the first uses of cosmos is that to identify a general in the Iliad, because it's someone who sets in order things. So, and cosmos comes to mean in the philosophers, the natural order that is not the result of human making. Now, there are many words for speech, for names, for words, for verbs, but there's only one word that comes to mean the rational articulation, or the articulation of what the mind understands, and that's logos. So the notion of nature, which leads to the notion of an arche and a cosmos, then leads to a word for rational articulation that can have that meaning because it's a reflection of the order of nature as a whole. And that's why Heraclitus deliberately puts the word always between the logos, his logos, and the logos that is always, and the human beings that always come to be without understanding. But it means that there is a logos, an order in the whole that can be understood and reflected in a true logos like his. Now, if that's possible, it has many implications, one of which is that the true intellection of the order of things as they are must be the same as that order. Noein and enai, intellection and being, must be the same. So two things very quickly from that. Political interpretation of this is that the truth is either inaccessible or completely irrelevant to political things. So you should use the political things for your own good, make your own gods, change the laws, and so on. And if this picture is true, then it means that all human understanding in the cities, their gods, their rules, their laws, have the status of constructions, which you should use the art of rhetoric to your own advantage. You should manipulate via the art of rhetoric to your own advantage. And it makes rhetoric the highest political art, which is not the highest political art in Plato and Aristotle. And so that's where we get the movement called sophistry. I just want to make a very brief digression. I was reading a review of the latest edition of the Pre-Socratics, and the reviewer says, Socrates may have introduced several innovations into moral philosophy or philosophy generally, such as the search for definitions. But Greek philosophy before Socrates did not fail to treat of ethical and political topics, nor did ongoing philosophical debates and traditions cease at his birth, acme, or death. Socrates is not an ideal temporal marker, blah, blah, blah. Now, this is because we no longer understand what philosophy means, and we no longer understand what Socrates means. Socrates looked at this situation as I've very inadequately sketched it, and said, this can't explain to me my own actions as a human being. For example, and this is an example from the Phaedo, he says, I'm sitting in prison and I'm about to be executed, and I'm not doing it because the elements of my body are arranged in a certain order, or that there are certain elements moving in and out of my mouth. That's not the explanation for my speaking. The reason why I'm sitting here is because I had the opinion, and we had the word doxa before, Andrew brought it up, the basic word for judgment or opinion. I had the opinion that it was more noble and just to stay here and endure the penalty rather than to run away. So then he says, shortly after making this statement, he makes a philosophical claim that the mistake of the earlier philosophers is to substitute the conditions for something, that without which something couldn't be. For example, without a body that's alive, you don't have a mind, and that mind could not therefore understand what is noble or just. But they're mistaking the condition for the actual thing itself. And then he goes on to say, I'm doing nothing more than my usual hypothesis that there is such a thing as the noble or just, or the good and the beautiful. And he uses this word that we get hypothesis from. Hypotethemi. Tethemi means to place, and hypo means under. It's an assumption. So his assumption is, and it's not an assumption in a hypothesis like something that you can then experiment upon. It's a basic assumption that our speech is meaningful and it has a reference to something. It has the status of an opinion, but the things about which we are speaking, we hypothesize are the beings. And the beings aren't restricted to the order of the material elements and so on. But I'm running over the time that I said I'd use for this exposition, and that was radically inadequate, but that's a suggestion for discussion. Yeah, but questions about that, the Greek that I've now rubbed out, or anything I've suggested?
Martin, when you first brought up that phrase, it reminded me of something that might be completely off and irrelevant, but in the 1980s, there was something called the Hume-style principle, whereby the theory was that if you practice something in your mind, like if skiers ran through their movement in their mind, they did just as well in an event as those who actually practiced in a bodily way. So could that have any relevance to this statement? Is that what intellect means, to run it through in your mind?
It definitely, yeah. And in that case, you are doing something with your mind that's not being practiced with the body. I challenge someone to do that for a long skiing or for a boxing match. But I think it is true, and on my own evidence is actually that if you do run through things in your mind the day before you compete at something, it actually improves. Yeah. And I've done tests about, this group of people run through their mind throwing a basketball and this don't. And yeah, but I think that points to the unity of body and mind. That you can practice on one part, body alone or mind virtually alone, and it improves the way the whole functions. And that's what Socrates wants to do, bring body and mind together, I think, by saying this is the condition, that's the end. Yeah. So I just wanted to make, there's one more suggestion I want to make, just a practical one about reading Greek. And that was just because I was hoping, and I think Bernie was hoping too, that we could have a quick discussion about what people might want to do. And I had some suggestions about, there's various ways that you can follow, and there's various kinds of textbook. And nowadays there's a lot of stuff online that's some of it helpful and some of it not. And when you get to a sort of an intermediate phase, there are now a lot of very helpful resources, and which there wasn't even when I went through 20 years ago. And you had to go straight from a textbook to a reasonably difficult grammar written for 12-year-old British schoolboys of 1870, which means excellent Greek. Yeah, so I had, if any of that is helpful, I can make some suggestions, or we can just discuss what we might do ourselves as well. Sorry, Bernie, I think I interrupted when you were about to.
Oh, no, I probably should. I haven't read your handout 3 on this, but are you saying, because this passage that you refer to in the Phaedo, we actually do in our introductory course. And so I just, and I find it an interesting passage. But are you saying here that Plato here is making a break with the pre-Socratics? He's making a break with Heraclitus.
Yeah,
and just what is that break? Just if you say now what that break is, and
adequately, it would take a long time to say how I see it, but just to try and make something intelligible. So he is saying there's no way to get from a normal human experience to the order that you talk about. There's no way from here to there. And whereas there is through our examination of our ordinary way of speaking about things. And that's our ordinary understanding and our ordinary articulation of it in speech. And that's our only non-arbitrary starting point. If you say the beings are X or Y, and there are forces of love and hate that bring the beings together and so on, like Empedocles, then you've immediately abstracted from our own experience that this is better to do than that. And that's our fundamental judgment. Now, ultimately, our understanding of the measure by which we understand that this is better than that could be radically incorrect, but it's an intuition that points to the true measure, that by comprehending the way we speak about things, we can improve our understanding.
And Heraclitus wasn't doing a similar thing.
No, because the true principles abstract from that ordinary experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
And there's only one good life. Now, obviously for Socrates, no, I don't know if it's obvious. It's not obvious to 90% of the scholarship, but for Socrates, the best life, without question, and by far, is the philosophical life. And then next is the statesman, and then next is X and Y and Z. About 5th is the poet, and 10th is the tyrant. There are various lists and various dialogues, as you know. But so he still has that view that the highest is the life of knowing. But one of the many things that passage intimates is that we have to begin with our ordinary speeches and deeds to begin that ascent. And the principles that we discover can't wipe out ordinary experience. Whereas everything is a change of fire for fire tends to do that.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Great. Should we get our wine now?
Yeah. I might do that and just move this screen down so I can.
Way ahead of you.
Yeah.
So anyone can answer this for me. So is Plato saying that there is an intelligible whole, and by examining, we can actually understand it by starting to examine our speech? Because the reason, like, people have been asking me why on earth are you studying ancient Greek? And to me, the answer is that it's the same reason why Aboriginal people need to study their own language. It's because language is the way to understand your culture, and ancient Greek and Latin are fundamental languages of our culture, and they hold within them these truths about who like Western civilization, who we are, and how our culture has come to this point. And if we don't understand it, then we don't understand ourselves. So is that kind of what you're talking about then, Martin, when you're saying like?
That's very important, but that's the opposite of what I'm trying to say. And but that's also, I think that's an extremely important but secondary reason. But I think, yeah, so I completely agree with what you've said. There are certain, we do not understand ourselves now because we are living in a world formed by modern philosophy and modern science, and we don't understand ourselves without an alternative to that. And without going back to the roots of that. So I think that's fundamental. But much more important is the discovery of the notion of human nature that the Greeks made, because that doesn't exist anywhere else. And that's not a claim to be fundamental to this or that culture. It's a claim to the truth of the human nature of all time in all places.
So is there an articulation of what that is? Or are you just saying it's unknowable, or it's nobody knows it yet, but it is possible to be known because it is an intelligible whole being? Or are you saying you know it and you're just not telling us until the end of the course?
That's a much more expensive course.
Okay.
And it takes 7 years. So I don't know. Yeah, no, my guess, the basic things that I think are available to learn from the Greeks are, I think, not available anywhere else, and illuminate what we have done in modernity, and we can understand ourselves better, because I think them. And what's okay? Can I make a slightly digressive answer?
Sure.
So this is Martin West's edition of the Odyssey.
Right.
And in book 10, line 302, Apollo says the following to Odysseus.
Okay.
Having spoken in this way, Argefontes, Apollo, gave him the pharmacon, the drug, having drawn it out of the earth, and he showed its nature, phusin. This is the only use of the word nature in Homer. He showed its nature. It had a black root, but its bloom was like milk. And the word for like is achelon. It's got that a likeness. The gods call it moly. And it's difficult to draw up for mortal men. But the gods are able to do all things, panta, all things. Okay, but the gods can't do all things. The gods' power is limited by the fact that certain things have certain natures. Right. And that raises, I mean, all of the arguments in theology are available for you in that 4 lines, because if things have a knowable, articulable nature, then they're not those meanings aren't created, and that's the limit to the power of the gods. And so, but Homer teaches the Greek gods to the Greeks, but then the philosophical tradition picks up on this notion articulated by that word nature, to understand the ordered whole that is prior to any act of making, prior to the invention of the gods, and so on. Now, what they're claiming is that is the truth. the truth available to human being qua human being, not the culturally relative truth. Now, we live in, like the Greek tradition has obviously many, many facets, from biology to history and so on. But two chief ones that I see, the poetic and the philosophical, which are in competition, as Plato says, the ancient quarrel or ancient difference between between philosophy and poetry. Philosophy says that there is a noble human nature that can guide individual life, if not collective life, whereas the poets appear to teach that there are mysteries beyond any human rational understanding, and the character of a human being who tried to rationally order his life, Oedipus, ends up destroying himself by his knowledge and putting out his eyes, meaning he doesn't want to see what he can see.
Martin, could I ask, I thought Socrates said that the best life was the examined life. Is that the same as philosophical? Is that how you're meaning the word philosophical? And, like the Delphic Oracle to know thyself, which is about examination. And then in the East, in the Vedanta and yoga and so forth, and Buddhism, the same sort of focus, but called like awareness, that leads to consciousness, which I suppose is like a higher awareness, and that the awareness is through wisdom and through not this examination, nada. Is that what you mean by philosophical in the way that you're saying it?
Well, when Socrates says the unexamined life is not worthy of being lived by a human being in the Apology, his next few words are, and to describe the examined life is understanding what human excellence is in the examination of myself and others. But you can't understand human excellence without understanding what he's not saying Greek excellence or Spartan excellence, or Persian excellence, human excellence. But you can't understand that without an understanding of nature, and you can't have an understanding of nature without an understanding of the whole cosmos, because it won't exist in very many understandings of what the world is. So I think he means this. To understand yourself is because to understand yourself as a knower means that the cosmos must be a certain way, it must be knowable. And that's a very different world from, for example, the world that the tragic poets appear to teach we're in. That's inadequate but I don't want to ramble on. The other two, like, if there was a true understanding of human nature and it was produced by Plato or Heraclitus or someone, then it would have to be intimated and reflected in every teaching. The Buddha's teaching and Spartan, it would have to be reflected, even if they don't have the awareness of this notion of nature, which is what I'm suggesting.
Yes.
Well, I've seen comparisons of, Confucius and Socrates and so on. And what strikes me about the comparisons where people say this is very similar is that they're talking about a moral teaching. Morality is second for Socrates. It's second to understanding. And that's very, I immediately ask you, how all the major presses put out compilations of essays, like the Oxford Armchair Companion to Socrates, the Cambridge Fireside Companion to Plato, and so on. If you go to one of those, you get what is some of the best, that is second rank scholarship of our time, and you'll find out what most people think. And there'll be, like, the one on Plato, for example, will have an essay why Socrates is a moral philosopher and Plato's a metaphysician and so on. And I find that impossible, because it's the same person and they have no idea when dialogues were written or whatever. What it is that they're trying to divide things up by modern categories. But the two things go together, the thought that there's a certain way of life and that nature is a certain way. And that there are intelligible objects of the mind and so on. But you raise a very important and very broad question that I can't adequately sum up.
Yep, thank you.
About Heraclitus' quote that all things are just for the gods. There's a famous passage in Homer where Homer says that Zeus has two jars in his house, and one jar has good things and the other jar has bad things, and he like deals them out. And Plato's shocked by this and says Homer doesn't know what he's talking about because Plato can't, because Zeus can't be the author of evil. Is that what is Heraclitus saying what Plato's saying, or is he saying that the gods can see evil things, but it's all for the greater good in the long run or something?
I think he's saying that, you know, from the point of view of what is the case and what is knowable and true, our preferences and our notions of justice are completely irrelevant. And they're artificial, and now we need them. He says, you know, a people must defend its laws even more than the city wall, right? To be a people, you must defend your way of life. But those are both fictions. So I think he's saying that the true divine understanding of things is even more arbitrary than Zeus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what you're saying, it makes sense, but I'm not sure if it's a vexed question. I don't know what if it's what the proper answer to it is, because you know, I mean, so terrible things happen. How can anyone say they're just? You know, whether the gods, you know, it's the gods or anyone else.
Well, but in Homer, there is at least, terrible things happen unjustly, and the gods do things that are unjust, but but there is a recourse to the gods, and they're somehow the reinforcers of justice.
Do you think Heraclitus is different from Homer?
Yes, because the cosmos is completely indifferent to human justice. You can't pray to it. You know, you can't change its mind with sacrifices. No, you can be open to it with your mind, and so it will give back to you insofar as you are open to it with your mind. But it won't stop the Persians from invading. Whereas, you know, Zeus appears to help the Greeks win in the end after 10 years.
That's just it. The gods take different sides in the Iliad.
That's
Some
right.
gods take one side, the others the other. They quarrel, and they, you know, it's
But in the end, I think it was Zeus's vote about who won. You know, I don't know, is it the 10th line of the Iliad, the will of Zeus was fulfilled.
And so this is all happening at the same time as the Hebrew traditions are kind of heating up, and they're developing their concept of God. And when you're talking about before, you're talking about that. I've forgotten what I was going to say because I drank too much wine already. But it's very profound. And so, to what extent was that Hebrew tradition, was that reflected in anything that was happening in the pre-Socratics or the Socratic? Like, were they talking to each other at the same time? Because a lot of this stuff, because when I hear it, of course, what comes to mind is my upbringing, which is Christian, and so all of that theology kind of kicks in, and a lot of it is here about God and about, you know, what is sanity is seeing that which is seeing the world as God sees it. God not being an old man in the sky with a beard, but God being this omnipotent being, existence with a capital E. So I'm my question is, to what extent were they talking to each other? Were the Hebrews and the Greeks talking to each other at the same time as this was all getting developed, and who was influencing who?
There's a clearly apocryphal, but amusing remark. I forget who said it now, but a theologian who claimed that Plato was a student of Moses. But no, as far as I know, there's no contact between the two traditions until the New Testament, and there's no word for nature in the Old Testament, and which I think is telling, because it's a revelation that is supranatural. Right?
Yeah.
Now, later on, the two traditions were synthesized. You always have to ask yourself with a synthesis, which one is going to be demoted and which one's going to be promoted, because one element has to rule. And so in many traditions, philosophy became the handmaid to theology. But there are definite, you can see arguments, for example, in Plato that make sense from the theological point of view, and they can be appropriated. And so then the philosopher can understand nature as created nature by a God that is one, and so beyond logos, because it's the, sorry, I just have to, so because one is unspeakable, but only intuitable by the mind. It's the principle of counting, and therefore the principle of speech, and so on. And so, that was one of the ideas of God developed in this synthesis of philosophy and theology that could combine, that tried to say there's this common ground.
Yeah, because I remember talking about it with a priest once, and he was saying that it wasn't until the New Testament, when they sort of when they hit the Greeks, that they had to kind of actually come up with a way to communicate this idea of there being one God within three persons, and so they had to use philosophical concepts to communicate it, because they were talking to Greeks who were there. But it's extraordinary that there was no kind of discussion beforehand, but I suppose they're all being too busy being.
Yeah, if I can just cut in, Martin, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah. So Anna, there was we do this course in our school called Platonism and Christianity, and there was during the Hellenistic time, Judaism had this Hellenistic Judaism, and especially in the city of Alexandria. And there's a famous theologian, and he's probably survived because the Christians loved him, who's called Philo of Alexandria, or Philo the Jew, he's often called. And we've got a lot of his works, and then we've got the wisdom writings, some of which were written only in Greek during that time. So they are, if you like, parallel or earlier than Christian, generally earlier than the Christian text. So there was already an influence there, and that's where strong monotheism that looks like Platonic monotheism comes in. But I just want to, Martin, I just want to ask you about this nature thing, because I'm trying to connect it with Plato. Where does this nature relate to Plato's forms? Can we connect that? Because they seem to be really important for Plato, and you're focusing in on nature, on physos.
Well, there are a few passages where he straightforwardly says the nature of a thing is its eidos, is its form. And those are the natural principles. But he's got a new notion of nature that is much broader, that doesn't confine it to any kind of being. So it encompasses,
okay. And so another way of portraying what you're saying, perhaps in the transition, is that previously the poets, I'm just wondering if this is another way I can think about it. Previously, the poets said that the gods had kind of knowledge that was beyond human knowledge, right? And that if you like, I don't know who exactly did it, but let's say Plato, but probably earlier, Heraclitus, from some of the quotes you've been giving, said, well, actually, we've got God within us in enthusias, enthusiasm. We've got God within us. So there is divine within, there's divine in the soul. And so that is, if you like, human. So we can know what the gods know. And is that one way of seeing the transition?
Yeah, just a slight nuance in emphasis, in difference between the way you and I are articulating it, but very similar in that I think that, the highest, which we call the divine, is not, the object of sacrifice and so on. It's the knowable, and therefore the human mind that knows is the highest mind. And like when Heraclitus says both these things, on the one hand, the common, the universal, he says that's accessible to every human being. Every human being has a share in knowing and judging. But he's also saying almost no human being judges correctly. So.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Martin, I'm just losing the time, and sorry to butt in here, but sometimes people drift off after this point. And so I just want to jump in before that happens and just say on behalf of the Platonic Academy, we really appreciate you running this course. And I'm just absolutely astonished at its uptake and how people have got into it. I think it's extremely difficult. I'm finding the grammar difficult, and I'm sure other people are too, but there is this motivation to doing it, and I think there seems to be some motivation to do some more. Now, just to everyone, I'll be sending around a feedback form. And unfortunately, I was using SurveyMonkey and it doesn't give a free text in the free version. It used to, but it didn't give me it today. So that'll go around to your email. So if we can have some feedback about, especially about how people felt about this course, how we can tweak it, and what you might be interested in the future. And if you want to send a free text, send an email to me or to Martin or to anyone in our organisations. And the final thing I want to say is that at the Platonic Academy, we've got our little Christmas gig on Saturday morning, the 18th. RSVP to me, it's in the chat, it'll be on our website soon. And just finally, once again, on behalf of the Platonic Academy, thank you so much to Martin. This is knowledge that is not very common in Australia, in the world these days, this knowledge of the ancient Greek language, and the depth of understanding of those words and their histories and everything is just coming across really powerfully. So thank you very much for these classes, Martin, and I hope we have a continuing relationship with your school.
Oh, thank you. I'm very impressed that you've all managed to sustain this journey, because I vaguely recollect how hard it was to stumble into the language, and it's still hard. I'm reading Aeschylus now, and yeah, it's a difficult language. So yeah, and it's amazing that you've had this interest, and I do think it's one of the most important things we can do is learn ancient Greek. So well done. And yeah, I had to radically change my ideas of what to do, and it's very difficult to judge on Zoom exactly how you're responding. So any feedback would be really helpful about doing something for the future. I mean, I hope, I'm very extremely pleased that the Platonic Academy has had this course occur, because it was very good for me. And in the future, if we do something similar, I'm also looking to do, just start I want to start a course that might just be one or two people who are interested in doing it. Just do a complete course in Greek using this book on Plato's Meno, that it starts again at the alphabet from the very beginning. So I hope that, yeah, we can develop a course that will have a more general appeal. But if you're interested in this too, yeah, please be in touch, and I'll let you know if we can get it going next year sometime. And then we'll have a textbook, and you won't depend upon my inadequate notes for your comprehension of the language. But, yes, no, so yeah, well done for, our society is built on a number of ways of distracting you from serious study, and yet you've done some serious study, so congratulations.
Thank you, Martin. It was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Martin. It was very powerful.
Thank you.
I didn't keep up with it because I haven't learned all the endings and so on, but it was very powerful. It comes across in your voice a lot, you know, and as you said, a classroom would be more effective in person. Yeah, I've enjoyed it thoroughly, but there's so much more to do just with the package you've given us. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, the next one won't be so ambitious, but no, thank you for sticking with it. That's well done.
I've been learning Greek and I got this book. I found it. It's a Greek English lexicon book and it's 1883. And when I was learning modern Greek, nothing made sense. So I went, these definitions are wrong. And then everything that you've said, it's obviously ancient Greek, the lexicon of ancient Greek. And it's everything that the way you've described them, every word is exactly what they've got. So you're, the ancients have kind of agreed with you. Well done, mate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now you've got your tool for further study already
Yes,
there.
indeed. Yes, great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Phil.
Can I just add, last year during lockdown, I was looking for different things for my children to do to sustain their interest in various activities. And one of those, I had my 14-year-old son, he did a course in ancient Greece through the Greek community of Melbourne, whatever it's called. And I didn't really pay much close attention because I thought he was just being kept occupied. And he was very fortunate. It was a free course that ran for a couple of months. So that was amazing that was offered. And I was cleaning up his room, as mums do, the other day, and I came across this book. And that was the book that was used, called Eureka. I think it's a bit backwards, but it incorporated Indigenous things as well as classical ancient Greek. And having looked at it now, it actually goes through all the different cases and the endings as well. And there's a great little glossary at the end. So if anyone's got children that are interested, this might be beyond them, but the Greek Orthodox, or Greek community, whatever it's called, was running these classes, and it was done obviously in English because it wasn't just for children of Greek backgrounds. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that. I think I'll go and use this myself now, and children's texts can sometimes be just as helpful and useful. But thank you. I really enjoyed this course. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And that's great, that course. That sounds good.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I wrote up a few notes about different sorts of books for studying further if you want to study. So I'll send that around just as, if anyone's
That's
interested.
great. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Happy Christmas.
Thanks, everyone.
Merry
Yep.
Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Bye.